mean, I think there are, people who've made small industries out of denying the wage gap, and more power to them. Yeah. But I don't really think that anyone who's taken the time to really look into the complexity of the wage gap can deny it. The wage gap isn't simply a matter of comparing apples to apples and saying, men and women doing the same job are paid differently, although that does happen. Very clearly, in case after case after case, we see that happen. But the wage gap also reflects the basic undervaluing of women's labor in any capacity. So the vast majority of jobs that are high-wage jobs are men's jobs. They're masculine jobs. And indeed, if women start doing those jobs, and if women become the majority of people doing that work, wages plummet, as does status. So there's the question of sex segregation of the labor force, which we have. So the top jobs for women in the country today are still the jobs that were the top jobs in 1963. They have not changed in terms of categories. And so there's sex segregation, there's apples to apples discrimination, and then there's also the motherhood penalty and the fatherhood bonus. So women in their 20s without children reach peak parity in pay, because children haven't entered the picture yet. But the minute reproduction starts, women still bear the burden and the cost of care. And they do that without societal help in the United States. So we're the only developed, quote unquote, developed nation to not provide paid parental leave, paid, either parent. But the minute we have the incidence of childbirth and reproduction, women's salaries start to plummet. Now, when someone in a corporation understands that a man's going to be a father, he actually gets a raise, because he is, in our cultural mind, the person responsible for providing. Women don't get raises when they give birth. They get salary cuts. They get promotions forestalled. They need, quote unquote, more flexible hours. So they lose tenure in organizations. And that wage gap, which is really well understood, it's really well documented, that wage gap then becomes a wealth gap over time. Because if you can't stay in a job, if you don't have tenure, if you don't get seniority, you can't accrue wealth. You get off of what's called the wealth elevator. You don't have benefits. You don't have 401ks. You don't have accrued vacation time. You don't have contributions to Social Security. So what starts off as a wage gap has this real butterfly effect in terms of lifetime financial security and wealth.
And so what do you think for those that say that these are personal decisions and, jumping off the, as you call it, the wealth train is a choice, having children is a choice, or taking time off of work is a choice? What do you think about that? Or like with businesses, like if, there's less hours worked, or the type of jobs that we choose are personal decisions, that whole argument.
Well, I think people make personal decisions that are constrained by social realities, right? We choose as a society not to support women when they have children in their professional lives. And we choose instead to reward men in those professional situations. That's just bare bones facts on the ground, given what we know about the trajectories of people's careers and the choices that they make. Now, in the home, we also have big differences in the way people do domestic unpaid work. So women are still doing 2 hours more unpaid work a week within the home. That's also a choice. It's a choice to transfer wealth in the form of time to men so that they can either work for pay more or engage in more leisure activities. So men in the country have 2 hours more leisure time a week. That's deeply cultural, right? That's a choice that people make when they're in a these are heterosexual metrics, by the way, because families who are LGBTQ families tend not to have these dynamics that reinforce gender norms the same way. So we should define it as a heterosexual issue. But our institutions are really structured around the idea that there will be a single male wage earner who has the support of an unpaid spouse at home who is providing care for the elderly, for children, for domestic life. And that's just not the way most people live anymore. That's, not the majority of families in our country. So yes, there is an element of choice, but it's really unfair to define choice as though it exists in a vacuum somewhere out in space. It exists in the culture, and it exists within the political context of the choices we make as a culture.
I've been hearing a lot of talk about the topic of how much work mothers, or just stay-at-home mothers do in the house that goes unpaid, and how much
all mothers. It's not just stay-at-home mothers.
No, you're right. Mothers. I guess my question for that would be is who would do the paying? I guess I hear that argument. I assume that it means they should be paid for the work, or I guess I was just wondering about, because I hear that a lot, and I agree.
You mean that it's unpaid work?
Yeah, it's unpaid work, and therefore it's
So the work has value, right? It has value in the economy. In fact, the entire economy depends on that work. But the entire economy depends on that work being unpaid, right? So the question is, to me, not whether it is paid or not technically, but why it is that women are doing 90% of the unpaid work. Why isn't there an egalitarian division of labor for paid and unpaid work? Because we still pretend that the women doing the unpaid labor of society are going to be supported by some magical unicorn creature for the rest of their lives. And we know that most families need at least 2 incomes to survive. And so in that environment, we need a more egalitarian distribution of all labor, paid, unpaid, domestic, professional. That's essentially what we're talking about. And society can provide alternative structures, and other societies have. They have caring economies. And so you end up with more humane social policies for the elderly, for children, for working people. I'm afraid I'm going to have to go.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Sure. Well, sure. I mean, if we have to wrap up, I guess, is there anything else that you would like to say that maybe we didn't cover? I always want to make sure, our guests feel like they're able to get everything out.
I think for people that are really actually curious about these issues, we have a lot of secondhand information about what constitutes feminism in our culture. And feminism has a really negative reputation. And I don't think that it's any surprise as to why that would be. But I would just urge people to find out for themselves and not take so much secondhand mythologizing about the evils of equality. That's all.
Sure.
We don't educate people about the history of women in our political or social life in our schools, except, occasionally whipping out the dead suffragette. But there's a lot of information there for people who are curious.
Great. And where can people find you and your content and material?
I'm on Twitter is where I share most of my writing. And my book is available pretty much anywhere.
Rage Becomes Her.
Rage Becomes Her. It has 70 pages of citations and a bibliography if anybody wants to go read that material. And so, I think pretty publicly available.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this conversation.
Of course. Well, maybe hopefully we can have you on again sometime. I had so many other questions, but I know that.
Yes, and I'm so sorry. Yeah. I know. But, if you want to do a segment on some other topic, let me know. I also have a thread on the wage gap that has all of these statistics in it, and I can send it to you, or someone can, anybody who's interested can find it on Twitter, because it links to all of the research that I cited in our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a whole resource section on our website, and when the bottom of this video. So if you send that over to us, we'll link it in the descriptions. Thank you so much, Soraya. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.